What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Quisha King Show, where we'll be discussing culture, faith, and politics, all geared towards the next generation. When you leave this show, you'll be ready to get up, get out, and go do something. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the very first episode of the Quisha King Show, where we explore faith, politics, culture for the next generation. I am so excited to have my first guest. He is an author. He has a PhD in mathematics, and he is the founder of New Discourses. Welcome, James Lindsay.
Great to be here, Quisha.
Oh my gosh, I am so happy to speak with you. You are like, just one of the people that I feel really get the deeper understanding of a lot of these topics that are going on in society right now. There's some people that like Chris Rufo or others who sort of just give the evidence of critical race theory, and they are more so showing, like the evidence of it being there, which is good. We need those types of things. But I like your approach to these types of topics, because I feel like you and I come from kind of the same, that we approach it with the same lens, so to speak, not to steal from the critical race theory folks, but from a more how this is affecting society, why we need to be concerned about this, why this is such a problem. It's, to me, it's one thing just to kind of acknowledge it. It's another thing to recognize why this is destructive. And so that's why I'm super excited to talk to you today and have you on to further explore those ideas.
Yeah, I'm geeked. That's really the thing, right? So Chris is doing awesome, incredible work with exposing as a very key component, and to articulating pathways towards solutions, which is also a very key component to fighting back against this. And his work, I mean, we would be in a lot of trouble without it. And so,
Right.
I can't give him enough credit. But at the same time, there is that second component, which is to understand, maybe it's the first component, I don't know, to understand what this is, where it comes from, how it works, what its implications are, because if you understand, if we were doctors, we would say something like the disease etiology. If you understand what it is and how it operates and where it's going, you can make predictions. You're not constantly having to react against it. And it's not all just, fight, which is very important. But there's this aspect of, oh, I understand what this is. And this is what I hear from people most of all, it's like, you gave me a vocabulary, you helped me understand, like, I don't feel crazy or alone anymore. I understand what this is, and it makes sense why it's happening when you understand what it is. So, I'm really glad that I can bring that to the table, and I'm glad that other people are doing things like what Chris are doing, so I don't have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. You do a lot. Like, I listen to your podcast, and they are longer form, which is, I love it. But you go through and you're reading directly from, I call them psychopaths.
They are
crazy people, and you're reading their words, and you almost can't believe what they're saying. You almost cannot believe that they literally, the thought came into their mind, and they were like, let me write this down. Let me document this crazy thought. And they do it, and they publish it, and they think it's great. It's wild. I think it's good. Instead of me reading it for myself, I almost like when someone else is reading it, because it almost gives me, it makes me look at it even more objectively. Like when I hear you reading these things, because then I'm like, gosh, and your emphasis on certain things and helping to clarify like what those things really mean. And we'll get more into this in a little bit, but like the queer theory, like when you were reading those papers, it was like,
they really think that.
They really think that. It is psychotic.
It's bad.
It is really, really bad. So
because it's one thing when it's like a little weirdo, at the school being weird. And it's another thing when it's like, holy crap, this is like a scholar who's dedicated their life to culminating at this point, which is total psychopathy. Yeah, so it's shocking. It's really shocking.
It truly is. To kind of back up a little bit and to give people a background on our relationship. So you tweeted that like I was one of your favorite mama bears, and I was like, yes, so
It's
awesome.
true.
I was like, I'm so honored. That was really cool. And then a couple, I don't know, here I go again with like confusion of time, but a couple weeks or months later, we did something really cool together. So I will let you tell people what we got to do together after that Twitter introduction.
Yeah, we had to go on Dr. Phil together. We ended up in at Paramount Pictures in sunny Los Angeles, California, Hollywood, California, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And we got to go after many COVID tests through the Dr. Phil show experience. I'm still taken by it. Happened on the exact same soundstage, or I don't know if they even call it a soundstage, stage, whatever it was, 29 or whatever, where Scrooged was filmed, which is super, Bill Murray, the Christmas movie. It's Christmas time now. It's like,
That's
it's
so
so
funny.
cool. But yeah, so we got to go on Dr. Phil, and you and I feel like maybe it's just me, but I feel like we really bonded sitting there in that backstage little green room thing, watching the episode unfold and I was looking over at you and I was watching, I was like, ooh, she's getting hot. Like
oh
this,
my gosh.
that
Yeah.
guy coming out like just lying, tearing up poor Derek Wilburn was there, and the dad from Colorado, I think he's from Colorado, and he gets up there and he just tells the truth the way he sees it, and this professor is just that they brought out is just like kind of making fun of him, and I was just getting madder and madder and madder, and I'm looking over at you and you're kind of doing like the whole like don't make me, and I was like, oh, I got my sister right here.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I was so mad by the time I got out there that I think that's probably why they're not airing it till January. We made them look pretty foolish, I think.
I think so too. I am so with you. Like we definitely bonded. Watching it, behind the scenes and watching how they, try or, to make people look a certain way because, I guess because they are the expert. And it was so insulting. It was insulting. It was just flat out lies. You realize these people don't have a real quest for truth. It's the ultimate grift. It is like the ultimate grift. And you see this expert, perched upon his chair, and he's looking down at the little people, looking down upon us. That was the vibe, that I got from him. It was just very, I'm here, darling, and you're down there, and there's nothing you can do. And all of it, what he was saying, how he was saying, and how he was sitting there, his pompous, his self, it was all just like bubbling up. And then when he started talking about, the common thing, it's you guys are trying to make it a boogeyman, and it's not really you just don't want real history to be taught. I think that was that one part where I was like, I was on the edge of my chair, and I was like, it is you. You don't want real history to be taught.
That's right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, it was so bogus, like strategically too. I mean, that this was done on purpose because they have the professor, and then they had some other domain expert lady that's not a professor, I don't think, something to do with education. And so they brought, it was supposed to be a debate, and they brought out one person after another. So they brought out him by himself and lets him frame the whole thing, the professor, the CRT professor. And then they brought out Derek, who's just this dad, right? He's trying to read this stuff. He's read Delgado and Stefanchik, but he's like trying to catch up to this guy's a professional, up against this dad. And he's like, well, this is what's going on with my kids. This is what's actually happening. He's like, no, that's not what's happening. Gaslighting him right there on stage. And then, they bring out this other person that's, the lady that's a domain specific expert. And here, I'm supposed to be our domain expert. I'm sitting in the back. Like they don't bring me out till the very, very end. And then they bring you and your friend Amy out. And, it's like, this isn't real. This isn't real. What you experience, your life, like your lived experience and your children, like that's not real. You don't understand it correctly. Let me talk down to you, and it was just, I was sitting back there just God, I was getting mad watching this. That it was, it was this totally. And of course, parents can talk back to professors, but when you're going to talk about something very specific like that, they carry this kind of aura of credibility, and they've got, all these, they've got all these fancy words and things, and they have had time. In fact, they've been paid for years just to read these books and be able to say this stuff in various ways. And so I was just thinking, they brought out their expert first, and our side's expert, being myself, came out last. And they stuck me in the audience instead of up on stage with everybody. I get it. There are only so many chairs, but that's a producer problem, right? And yeah, it's like that could have been organized. Because if I would have been out there, and y'all did great, don't get me wrong, but if I would have been out there, like, I would have been able to call out every one of his lives with citation in real time. Like, I can quote from memory the books, and
I think that was part of the plan.
I think so too. But then Derek, of course, brought that humor, I don't know, at the very end, right? So, because I was like, blah, blah, blah. And Derek brought up that this happened in 1989. And you just acted like the professor, Sean Harper, was like, 1989, that's not real. Whatever. You don't even know what you're talking about. And I was like, you damn well know that the founding conference of critical race theory was in Madison, Wisconsin, in a convent off the University of Wisconsin at Madison in 1989, and that's when Kimberly Crenshaw named it. These things, and then Derek's like, "I told you it was 1989." And it's so funny, so funny.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was I mean, it was an interesting experience, but yeah, I think when you have a deeper understanding of what these people are, and I'm going to say it like that, like what they are, because it's like what they're trying to do. It has totally changed. It goes beyond just like their titles and their their studies, because what you're trying to do to society is so damaging. It is so damaging. And that kind of brings me, I want to just briefly talk about, so I first heard about you when you were writing the papers with the feminist papers. But I wanted to ask you, like, what was it that prompted you to be even interested in that, what they were doing, and like the feminist, this third wave crazy feminist movement, and why'd you care about that?
So that's kind of a long story. It's sort of a silly story. Basically everybody knows that I was involved in the new atheism movement 10 years ago. And 10 years ago this year is, in fact, when it got hit with its woke cruise missile. There is an event that's got named, it has a scandal, so you have to end it in gate. It got named Elevator Gate because it took place in an elevator. A young woman at a conference, one of these atheist conferences. This isn't some seedy little, like, Comfort Inn and, Fort Worth or something like that. This was a fancy, I think, 5-star hotel in Ireland. If I wasn't there, but if I've heard the story correctly, it was certainly a fancy hotel in Ireland. This wasn't like some seedy little deal. This was a major conference. And this young feminist woman gave a panel talk, and people liked it apparently because this guy, after the party at that evening, everybody's out at the bar having a good time, socializing and drinking or whatever. And this young woman and some young man end up in the elevator together, going up to the rooms, and it's just the two of them. And he sounds like this story's about to get wild and dangerous, right? And so the guy plucks up the courage and asks her to coffee. Said, "I like your talk. Can we get coffee?" And that's in her telling of the story, not his. And she says no. Nothing else happened. The end. Shoots the poor guy down. She gets off the elevator. I don't know which one or the other. They got to, the 2 different floors. One of them got off the elevator before the other. I don't know that detail. And off they go to their respective rooms. Nothing else happened. And then she creates a blog or video blog, kind of like they called them vlogs back in the day, VLOG. She goes and makes a little video and says that this is the kind of thing that makes women feel uncomfortable and makes them not want to come to conferences, as it's indicative of the systemic sexism in the movement, et cetera, blah, 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 that the feminists were all railing about. And it's like, the dude just asked you out, you shot him down, and nothing else happened. But it was in an elevator where it was trapped. This is what makes women feel uncomfortable and not want to come to these things, yada, yada. And so then that probably would have just been another stupid, piece of static that came up in idiocy movement that was happening at the time, because it was very woke early on. I was told, and this is before my time involved with it, that even in 2007 and 2008, this kind of feminist woke stuff was really rampant happening in there. Then it flared up again in 2011. And so Richard Dawkins, however, kind of the God delusion, Mr. Atheist, made fun of it. He made fun of it after it came out. And I think he might have headlined to the conference, if I'm not mistaken, but I don't know that detail either. And so he made fun of it and compared it to the plight of a young Muslim girl under, brutal Sharia. And, it writes this very satirical, sarcastic letter, Dear Muslima is what it was called. I know that you've had your genitals mutilated, and I know that you get beaten and you get passed around by your uncles or whatever horrific things. But did you know this Western feminist got asked out in an elevator, and oh my gosh, and just completely, blew it up. And this was the precipitating event, as I would look back at it now, that caused the rampant polarization and wokeification of that movement. And so I was kind of involved in that. It was my kind of intellectual outlet. I kind of thought it was going to be a fun social thing to be involved in. And it just got literally, as I was coming into it, it just gets blown up by wokeness. And then my friends that I was making in it, that had been in it for a few years, some of them had careers they were building within it, speaking careers and writing careers. It all gets torpedoed. And so we got very interested in seeing it. I had some other incidents where systemic accusations of racism were happening from kind of educated white people toward uneducated white people around me. And I was like, something's weird with this systemic word. So I started looking a little bit at the literature. Then in 2016, what really got our attention, so that was on our radar by 2011, and kind of big on our radar by 2014, 15. And I wrote stuff back then that people can still find that shows that we were definitely talking about it. And then in 2016, there was a paper written, and I have a background in math and science. And so it was like literally my bachelor's degree is in physics. So I'm like real soft on the sciences, it's like, I got a big piece of my heart is there. Why do you think I got involved in this atheism movement in the first place? Is like they were championing science, and there was like a lot of crazy religious pushback happening at the same time. It was frustrating for some of us. And so anyway, there's this paper. It's like, we need feminism to be brought into glaciology, and it got made fun of in the media. A bunch of people were like, this can't be real. It's got to be a hoax. And that got my friend Peter Bogosian and I, who were working together, talking like, we should just write a hoax. Like, let's prank these people. They can't tell the difference. And so we wrote one just kind of for fun around the end of 2016. And then in early 2017, in May, actually, it ended up landing in a predatory journal through a really weird, it's borderline, not I just talked about atheism, it's borderline providential, the number of weird bounces that this thing took to land in this journal. Like, they were supposed to charge us money, and then they literally forgot to charge us and published it. And then we're like, can you pay us now? And we're like, no,
Right.
absolutely not. And so, all these weird things happened, and it blew up a little bit. We got a lot of attention. We got made fun of a lot. We got called all kinds of bad names. But in particular, one friendly person, Alan Sokol himself, who wrote a hoax in the 90s, we got him a lot of success and fame. And then one very unfriendly person who I won't name, but I could, wrote criticisms that actually included instructions for what we should have done to make it work. And so Peter and I got on the phone and we're like, well, let's just do that. Let's just do what they said. And as a matter of fact, we wanted to do it, and we wanted to show Alan that we weren't out of our minds. But we also had this very hostile character who had written this thing in Slate. So if you want to find it, it's in Slate. It's a criticism of the conceptual penis as a social construct. You can look it up. And that's what our paper was called. And you can look that up.
I'm sorry. It was called what? Say that one more time.
The conceptual penis as a social construct. So we claimed that we shouldn't think of penises as anatomical organs, but instead as a conceptual, social constructed thing that causes all the problems in the world, especially climate change. That's really the paper. And it's really, really lewd, really crass, really funny.
So
really,
right up your alley. Right.
Yeah, it's totally nasty in some parts. And so anyway, we wanted to see what would happen. Also, part of our motivation really was, we had this guy who's a relentless critic of us, trashes us in this long article in Slate, about it, and we were like, let's just use his instructions, let's satisfy everything he says we have to do, see if he changes his mind. And of course, when we did the Grievance Studies affair, we jumped over every bar he had set, in spades, and come to find out, he didn't change his mind at all. He wasn't satisfied one bit. What a shock. Now, Alan Sokol, on the other hand, was. He said that we had cleared the bar. We had showed that there was some very alarming problem happening, whereas our critic did not. So you could see who had fair criticism of us, because both of them were very critical of the original, and who had unfair criticism. And we thought that was really fascinating. But that's what ended up getting us into it. And then what's taken the path, led me on the path I'm on now, is that when we were doing the research for those papers for the Grievance Studies affair, I remember having the conversation like, this is the unraveling of Western civilization. This is, in fact, my friend called it the seed of a genocide. When we started to realize, for example, one of our papers was about making privileged kids suffer reparations by chaining them up in school and making them sit on the floor and refusing to answer their questions and not letting them talk and basically abusing kids. And we said, well, we thought it was just funny. We said, but you have to do it compassionately. Right. And the peer reviewers came back and they were like, this is a great idea, except you can't center compassion because that recenters the needs of the privileged. What you actually have to do is center discomfort. And they told us about all this stuff. And I was like, holy crap, they're actually advocating child abuse and to increase child abuse. Wow. Like, the problem with our paper from their perspective was it advocated compassion. And it was like, holy crap, this is bad. This is, right at the beginning of 2018. And so that's when I started talking to my wife, like, if, we've got to expose this, this has got to come out. This is when Helen Pluckrose was involved in the project, the paper writing project with us. I started talking to her, and, she was writing this book about postmodern philosophy as it was. And we said, we've got to expose all this stuff. Right. And that's what Cynical Theories became. And then all the research that went into the project, then went into Cynical Theories. And then I took off with new discourses and just started diving down the rabbit holes further and further and further. I started reading the critical theorists, not just the postmodernists. And I finally realized, like you said, people need to understand how just damaging this is. And just like, holy crap, this is Marxism in a new package.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
That's all it is. I don't, it's funny. So, I mean, I'm a Christian, you're an atheist. That doesn't matter to me. But it's funny that, so I first started learning about critical race theory because I had heard it was coming into the Southern Baptist, or heard about it when it came into the Southern Baptist, convention, conference? Whatever, SBC.
Convention,
Convention.
SBC.
Yeah. And I was like, I had at this time, this is like 2019 or something like that. I had no idea that this thing was in schools. And I'm sitting there, and Bodhi Bacham, Neil Shenvi. Like, Neil Shenvi was the first person that I heard, was the first video that I had watched, and watching him explain the hierarchy and of the intersectionality and the critical, all of it. And so I was like, wow, this is awful coming into the church. Like, why would they do this? I didn't know. And then I was listening to Bodhi. And so that's how I came into it. So it's interesting that we both kind of came in. I mean, I would call it through faith. You would. Sure.
No, it's fine.
I don't know.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
But you know what I mean? It's like that. It wasn't school. It wasn't, education or whatever. But
religion.
Religion.
And, that was very shocking for me too, because I'm now friends with, obviously, and work with Michael O'Fallon a lot, and I've appeared with him many times. And one of the I met Michael at the beginning of 2019, and by summer in 2019, he took us to New York City. My friend Peter mentioned a minute ago, and we went because he saw us on some video discussing, is intersectionality basically religious? And our thesis was, yes, it is. And, it's kind of interesting because we were, from this atheism perspective, looking and saying, wow, this has a lot of parallels to the religion that we've been criticizing. And now I kind of regret a lot of the criticism I made, by the way, just to be clear about that. It's the new atheism movement was a critical religion studies movement. And it's like, oof, looking back at that a little bit. But it's partly why I understand where this is coming from. It's like I kind of participated in it. So anyway, we're looking at it from that angle and like, wow, this is, I even said, and the magic words that got Michael's attention were that I'd said that it has an Augustinian construct underneath it. So it's rooted in, original sin, and then, what you have to do in order to attain redemption. And there's a confessional model based upon, how you're going to approach that. And, it's got this whole Augustinian framework underneath it. And
Mhm.
Michael was like, that's it, and so he'd been trying to tell people himself, and then hear these atheists saying it and saying it well. And so he
Wow.
starts showing it to guys in the church, and they're, well, they're atheists. We don't know what to do, da, da, da. But, next thing you know, Michael takes a chance on us. He, we meet a couple of times. We have some discussions. We went to a couple of different places. And then finally in July, I think it was July, it was hot, whatever. It was June or July. Pretty sure it was July. We end up in Manhattan, and we end up on a rooftop in Manhattan that he found to do a shoot. So we stay in this hotel, and there's like a rooftop patio.
Mhm.
And so we asked if we could, basically be kind of exclusive on the patio, and they told us we could have half of it or whatever. And so
Mhm.
we got the Chrysler building in the background, this great view. And
Mhm.
in we shot a handful of videos up there, and it just talking about these issues: critical race theory, what is it? Postmodernism, what is it? And then he said, do you mind if we talk about what's going on in the Southern Baptist Convention? And I was like, why not? And so I have no idea. I've never paid any attention to Southern Baptist Convention. I couldn't name 3 people involved in it.
Right.
Probably would have been like Jerry Falwell. Is that a name? Billy Graham,
Right.
or those people,
Yeah.
and it's like, that's my extent of knowledge. And he reads this statement from the 2019 Southern Baptist Convention meeting, this infamous Resolution 9, that says something
Right.
along the lines of, there's a lot of whereasing at the beginning, and after the
Mhm.
whereases, there's bringing critical race theory and intersectionality as analytical tools subordinate to scripture. And he said, he reads this to us sitting there at this table on this rooftop, and he's like, well, what do you think of that? And I was like, I think you got a big wooden horse sitting outside your church about to come in. And he was like, well, this was in April, so it's already in. I was like, well, that's bad. We had this iconic conversation. Hundreds of thousands of people have seen it. I've heard some very big people have seen it as well through some secret channels, like people maybe that were in the White House at some point or another. But it was, this huge thing. It kind of blew open what was going on in all of this. And it was the faith aspect, and for me, I was shocked. That's kind of the point I wanted to make. Like I was like, the Southern Baptist Convention, like this, what, how's that possible? It's like, in the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, having professors that are, as a Black man, I have to acknowledge that I have male privilege, and so I have to listen to my female sisters. But then on the other hand, as a Black man, I also have the racial oppression associated with my race, and so I have a unique perspective I can bring. And it's like, whoa, that's straight up, intersectional positionality this guy's doing. That's Dr. Jarvis Williams, if anybody needs a name for that. That really is a statement that he made. And I'm just, sitting there, and I was like, who is this guy? He's like, oh, he's a professor at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. I'm like, what? I was blown away. And for a couple of years, I went around, a year or so, I should say, and told people, I'm like, do you know how bad this problem is? It's in the Southern Baptist Convention. It's in everything. If it's in that, it's in everything. It's, and I was like, it's in the Catholic Church. Little didn't know it came out of the Catholic Church in large regard. So, I've always been a little skeptical, by the way, that religion alone is enough to repel this stuff. It's like, no, this stuff is infected religion. And in many cases, through like liberation theology, it actually mainstreamed into society out of religion. So it was shocking to me, just shocking.
It is shocking. And even so, when I first came into like the political realm, I tell this story sometimes where I was having a conversation with a close family relative. We were talking about Black Lives Matter. This is like right after the 2016 election. We're talking about, if you remember, there were like riots and same kind of thing that was going on in 2020, just not as bad. So she was talking, she's like, well, I like Black Lives Matter. I just wish they would show up in Black neighborhoods when it's a shooting that doesn't involve a police officer. And at this point in time, I was full on, somewhat, I wouldn't even say I was a liberal. I just believed all of like the CNN stuff. And, I just thought that stuff was real. I thought there's no way that they're showing this, all this stuff on TV and people are rioting. Clearly there has to be a problem if they're rioting in the streets. And I said, well, I'm going to go look up the numbers and see like, police shootings with unarmed Black men as opposed to Black on Black crime in Black neighborhoods. And I was shocked. I'm like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense to, clearly there's a bigger problem over here. Why are we rioting in the streets? So I just started doing some digging, found Dr. Thomas Sowell. That was like, And then I was
Yeah.
like, whoa, wait a minute. Like this, like we're wrong. So I called my family and I'm like, we can't vote for the Democrats anymore. Like they're the bad guys. Like, wait a minute. And I thought they were gonna like sing my praises and tell me, like, thank you, Quisha, thank you for bringing this information to us. And my mom was like, oh my God, she's drunk the Kool-Aid. So I was dealing with all of that, and I had a moment where I feel like God spoke to my heart, and He said, "Your skin color has become an idol in your life," and that was another like, and just a massive download of all of this evidence of how my skin color had become an idol in my life, and as a believer, Christ is where that should be, that should hold that spot, not your skin color. And it was just so evident in just looking at how I was raised, looking at, growing up, you're told, that basically, you have to watch out for white folks, and you're just told, you're inundated with all these little things, like, throughout your life. Not every single Black person, but, a lot of us. And once I had this mind transition, I was properly aligned. It was really hard for me to understand how, as believers, we were allowing this to come into the church, because it's supposed to be your guiding principle. It's like, that's the thing that's supposed to literally guide every single thing that you do. And so when you hear something that's antithetical to the Bible, your response is supposed to be X, and that wasn't happening. And so that's why it was so jarring to hear about this focus on race in the church, and this focus on, gender and all of it. It's like, did you not read that part that when God said that we're like one blood? Did you you missed that?
Did you skip that part?
You skipped that part. And so it is because they so tie it to religion. And when I say they, I mean the critical race theorists and the people who are pushing this nonsense. It does take such the form of religion that it replaces it, and that's
right.
why it can be an idol. It can take that place, and I'm just like, wow, like, just in my mind, it's like, if I could give a visual, it's like like all these things. It's just like, I'm like, I should not have a head at this point, because I was just like, just the download of all of this stuff, just watching this in society, it was so crazy. So when you replace that with when you replace your religion with something like a critical race theory or a Marxist ideology of any kind, because it's infected in so many things, you have to realize, just like someone would go out and do missionary work, you talk a lot about the praxis and realizing the activist part of Marxism, because again, I think that's something that distinctly makes your work different, and how you look at this thing. To me, it's the more important part, because they're missionaries, and they're on a mission to implement this destructive idea into society and change the next generation. They want to change. They want to make little activists. They want to make their new revolutionaries. And so, can you just more so talk about why the activist part of it, and why paying attention to how this is affecting society and the destructiveness of it? Like, can you just explain that for people?
Well, I mean, it's really important to understand what you just said, that they're trying to take the next generation and turn them into activists. They're actually trying to get the new generation to reject everything before. So whether you look back at the French Revolution, where they came up with a whole new calendar, within 10 months, and I don't know if you know how much you know about the French Revolution. I'm only limited in my French Revolution, but they created a whole new society. They're going to throw out the entire old, aristocratic society of France. They were going to replace it. They're going to get rid of the priesthood. They were going to get rid of the royalty. They were going to get rid of basically everything before. They created literally a new calendar that had 10 months. One of them, the only one that I can name of the 10 months is Thermidor. And the reason I know that is because when it all went bad a few years into it, there was what was called the Thermidorian reaction, which I thought referred to a group of people when I first heard it, because I didn't realize they made up new months, but it refers to when it happened. And this kind of, few weeks long, just bloody disaster where all the revolutionaries kind of flipped over and started getting killed themselves. And so whether it's whether it's what you see with Mao, with the Cultural Revolution,
right,
and the attempt to create an entirely new society that gets rid of the four olds, old culture, old customs, old habits, old ways of thinking. You're going to obliterate all of that, whether it's Pol Pot with his desire to get to what he literally called year zero, or we're going to start over and have an entirely new calendar that starts at year zero, a complete new revolution, to a whole new world. What they want to do is they want to take the younger generation, wherever that gets defined, and to separate it from everything that came before it, including their teachers, including their parents, including their grandparents, including their cultural roots, including their religion. And they use all these different tools, whether it's to get people to think in terms of all this race stuff, whether it's to get people to, especially though the gender, sex, and sexuality stuff, is because it's so easy, well, if you've got some made up sexuality that didn't exist 30 years ago, literally just made up,
right.
It's so easy to get some angry 14-year-old to come home believing that they're a lithsexual, whatever the heck that means.
That's a new one for me.
No, it's a thing. And then try to explain it to their parents, like, I'm a lithsexual and I have a xenogender or whatever. And their parents are like, what? And they're like, you don't understand, and you can't even understand where I am in my life. You don't even understand what's going on. And so a lot of this stuff is designed, and it's very much like what Mao did during his Cultural Revolution with the kids in schools to indoctrinate a generation of students who would rebel against and destroy everything older, every bit of root that the society has. Because if you can rip it all up at the roots, and you can turn all the kids into revolutionaries who don't know how to know themselves except through the ideology, then you can, completely reset the entire society, they think, and this kind of literally this revolution, as Marx said. And you can see what happened in the streets all last year and since, where they've got rid of the police. Marx said, violence is the midwife of the revolution. So violence is what brings the revolution into the world, facilitates bringing it through. And you can see what the purpose of it is immediately when you realize that that's what they're recreating. And they're using identity factors instead of economic factors or social factors. So for Mao, and I've said this a few times recently, for Mao, he separated society into 5 categories that were called red and 5 categories that were called black. He made them identities. The black ones were bad. The red ones were good, because communism is red. And so, if you got labeled like, oh, well, you have right-wing values, well, that's a black mark on your soul, communist soul. And so then they give you, well, do these revolutionary acts and you become a red identity. And it's the same thing. Well, if you're a white kid in schools right now, well, your race is tied to all this evil. You're a bad kid. It's not really your fault, but you can't really get away from it. And so there's no positive white identity, Robin DiAngelo tells us. But, if you become one of these queer identities, now you get to be in one of these, positive identity groups. And that your parents aren't going to understand. That's going to cause you to look at your religion that says man was made man and woman to be complements and companions to one another. And you're going to say, well, that's outdated. That's wrong. Get rid of that. Right. That's old ways of thinking. That's old customs. That's old culture. That's exactly Maoism. And so you look at what happened in China from 66 to 76 when Mao was in charge. The only difference is that there's no specific Mao in charge. It's all decentralized rather than centralized, but it's exactly the same logic playing out with no figurehead. And when you realize that that's what they're doing in the schools, and why, is to separate the kids of this generation from all the generations before them, to make them hate their parents, to make them reject their parents, the family, the traditions, the culture and the religion, and to just rip them all out of that and put them into a totally new context that they control with their ideology. Then you understand just how destructive it is. And the fact that it uses violence and, there's this one that went around Twitter yesterday or the day before where there's some, unfortunate looking young woman screaming about something, dressed strangely with the strange hair and the ugly makeup and the weird clothes and, you know,
Yeah.
everything. And the thing everybody was saying is, why do they always look like this? And that's why, is the further they can separate you from the norms of the existing society, the more effective they believe their activism is. And so, and it's also that requires a lot of commitment. Imagine to look like that and go out in public, be like, good Lord. And so, and act like that in public. And so it requires a lot of moral and emotional commitment, psychological commitment to your cause. And so this is actually like a cult indoctrination, but the goal is to break away and make everything that was seem outdated and old and bad and oppressive and repressive. And so you have introduction of racial thinking, where we finally, you know, we're not all the way away from it, but we got pretty good. We're getting a lot better, you know, in the last 20 years. You reintroduce that and make it real bad. And then you add in all the weird sexual stuff and gender stuff, which they did in the communist revolution in Hungary. They androgenized in China. One of the sayings in Maoist China was man, woman, boy, girl, we are all the same.
I remember hearing that.
Yeah, I wish I could remember how to say it in Mandarin. I used to be able to rattle it off, but it's been a while.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but you know, I've been to Beijing, and I've seen, you know, murals painted on buildings. It's in characters, so somebody had to read it to me because I can't read the characters. I can read a few of them, but not most of them. And it shows like a bunch of little happy, you know, boys and girls and moms and dads. It looks like, and it says, "Man, woman, boy, girl, we are all the same." And so, you know, you can see what's actually going on is to get people to break away from everything before, so that they can now be in this new state. But that state is what? It's a state of dependency. Like, you have to be told what the new fashion is. You have to be told what the new sexualities are. You have to be told what the proper and improper identity categories are. You have to be told how you're going to think about race. I can't meet you as an individual and you meet me as an individual and us figure out our own relationship. But you got to be told, oh, well, there's a dynamic here that we're not acknowledging. Right. And so it makes you completely dependent upon the ideologists. Not necessarily, but yes, in actuality, the state that's going to enforce it. But so what you see is a model of dependency instead of independence,
right?
And a model of collectivism instead of individuality. And it's a catastrophe.
It truly is. You know, Christians used to get, and probably still do, you know, this people used to say like, oh, to be a Christian, you have to check your brain at the door. And I'm just like, okay, this is checking your brain at the door.
Like, yeah, right. No, all I hear from Christians is gifts of the Spirit this, gifts of the Spirit that, which means everybody has their unique talents. Everybody has their unique aspects that they can bring. Maybe you're super smart and you can analyze the text. Maybe you're super savvy and you can make money and, you know, do this. Or maybe you're super socially connected and you can bring people together and you can get people motivated. Everybody has different gifts of the Spirit, which is a very individualist kind of remark. And of course, the Christian thing then is based deep in the imago Dei, that everybody is a standard bearer of God. And so God's reflected in each individual through their unique talents, through their limited aspect as a mortal. And so it's like, no, Christian theology is a little better than this. In fact, a lot better than this in every regard. And obviously, you know, Christians see themselves as all brothers and sisters, but not all as one person.
Right.
Right. Yep. They're not all a collective.
And you know, there's a parable. Do you know the parable about the talents that Jesus?
That's my favorite parable. Actually, I was very lucky in college to run into that, and it became a very important part of my life through my formative 18 to 23 or so years. Yeah, it's the most important, you know. It's so, you know, I've given you dominion over a few things, and now you should be master over many. Good and faithful servant, you know. And so it's like, build your, you know, take command over what small arena that you have, prove your worth with it, build the skills. I even did a podcast about the parable of the talents, believe it or not, you know, build your skill with it, gain mastery over a few things, and then you're ready to take on more and bigger and broader challenges and to grow, whether that's growing spiritually within yourself, whether it's growing within your community, whether it's growing professionally, whatever it happens to be. You know, and that's, you know, very Jordan Peterson, clean your room kind of stuff too. Clean your room first, get your room in order, then go out and change the world.
Right.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
It's
absolutely key.
It to me, it's one of the things that totally destroys, even if you're not, you know, you don't have to be a Christian to understand these principles. A lot of these things are universal truths. You know, it's just true. If you do this, you will get that. You
Yeah,
know,
right.
so it's a great way to destroy this whole narrative of, you know, like everybody has to think alike, be alike, do alike, especially if you are Christian. Like, I can't, that is still mind boggling to me that Christian people think that, you know, just we have to be lock and step with, you know, with everyone just because you are a girl or because you're black or, you know, you happen to have more melanin than someone else. I said recently at a speaking event that I was doing, you know, we put so much emphasis on skin color when it's literally, it's just God's way of showing his love of variety. Okay. That's it. Like, it's meaningless. It does not think, it doesn't reason, it doesn't form opinions. It's not that. It's like as valuable as like your hair. You know, it's going in the dirt at the end of the day. Okay.
That's
It's
right.
not,
That's right.
your soul does not have a color. You know, it's, I think that those are more important things that we should be focusing on, and the things that we're leaving in our children, not
That's right.
these outside appearances. It's so frustrating to see these types of people and the types of things that, you know, that they're focused on. But
I'll
that's
go deep with you for a second if you
okay.
want.
Yeah,
So a
let's
lot of
nerd out.
people,
Go ahead.
yeah, a lot of people don't know Marxism very well. You know, it's a real shame in the American education system. We haven't ever really, we don't learn it's purposed. You know, the Marxists
Right.
took over education, and we don't learn about Marxism
Of
now.
course.
So when you're ignorant of it, you can't see it when it's creeping on you.
Hmm.
But Marx had a whole belief system of his own based upon labor. Why do you think it's so focused? Marxism is so focused on labor. It's not just a theory of value and of economics.
Hmm.
He believed that. So it's very difficult to get this because we don't think this way anymore. But there are kind of two big views, philosophically speaking. One is that the world is out there, and you see the world, and you bring it in through your senses, and that shapes who you are. The other is that you create the world in your head. The world isn't really out there, and you create the world. So they're called realism versus anti-realism. And Marx
Okay.
was anti-realist. All the romantics were, and Marx was kind of caught up in the romantic tradition. And so he believed that man makes the world and so makes himself through labor. This is why the hammer and sickle are on the communist flag. They're the kinds of work that are considered authentic and genuine, kind of labor that Marx really respected, so to speak, and said that are real work because you're out there shaping the world to make it into something. So you're taking the jungle and turning it into a garden, if you will.
Hmm.
And you can
Hmm.
see the theological, the genesis right there,
Hmm.
right? The garden, you're remaking the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
And so when you're making that, you're also making yourself. And so his theology is that you're making man into socialist man by making the world into socialist world. And so when you start to hear stuff like you got to do the work or whatever, it's the same do the work as the hammer and sickle are reflected, go out and change the world. But the object now becomes like your skin color. So that becomes the place where you're building the garden is in your skin color or in your sexual identity. So this is
Hmm.
why they adopt why Kimberly Crenshaw, when she writes in Mapping the Margins, that there's a fundamental difference, she says, between I'm a person who happens to be black, which she
Right.
says strains for a certain universality. And it says, in effect, I am first a person. Imagine being mad about that. But then
Right.
she says there's a fundamental difference between I'm a person who happens to be black and the statement I am black. And she says that becomes an anchor for subjectivity. And that's, of course, exactly what Marx is talking about. That subjective view that the world only exists in your own head. And the problem is the world exists in my head and the world exists in your head. And you and I might not see the world the same way. So we're not creating the same world.
Right.
But if we all get on the same page, now we're creating the same world. And so you become, I remove the objectivity of you by you and I having exactly the same values. But now the work becomes to reify your skin color as an identity factor, to reify your gender status as an identity factor, to reify or even deify really all of these external characteristics that should mean less and less and less, and to turn those into something that becomes more and more and more central. And that's why you always hear them saying center this, center that, center race, center sex, center gender in our discussions. And so when they say do the work, that's literally what they're talking. They're reinvoking Marx.
Wow.
Right there. It's Marx's, not his basic economic philosophy, which is all a reflection of this. It's actually Marx's underlying theological presuppositions about how the world works and the role of labor within that. But now the labor is not physical labor, it's cultural labor. And cultural labor is interpreted through identity. So you doing the work as a Black woman means that you have to spend all this time thinking about what it means to be a Black woman. And the way that you're going to do that is by, as Crenshaw tells you, I, as a white man, am imposing that upon you. And so you have to adopt those stereotypes in strategic retaliation against that in order to break free of it. But you do so in clownish forms, as Marcuse had it. So why on earth do they always look like that? Because they're adopting stereotypes in clownish form to exaggerate and break the spell of them. Yeah. Do the work.
That brings up too the queer theory, because with the you have to some of the writings, and I don't remember the names of the folks who were writing this thing, but so when they're talking about sex education, this comprehensive sex education, they're saying that you have to. They do these exercises with the teachers who are then supposed to bring it into the classroom, that you have to, kids are naturally going to be uncomfortable when they start to talk about these things. So what you have to do is you have to you talk about it in such vulgar terms. You basically, like the woman with the crazy hair, you're showing the most outrageous thing. So then when you start to bring it in, and it's, you're not talking about something so outrageous, just it's a little more it's a little closer to normal, still crazy, but a little closer to normal. Now it doesn't seem as bad. You have so gotten them accustomed to hearing these crazy things that now when they hear these more, it's still crazy, when you're talking about like penises and, vaginas and things like that in front of like 5-year-olds.
Right.
Maybe it's not so bad, because before you were talking about something, you were talking
real lewd.
Right.
Real lewd.
Let's just say that. But
Let's
they actually say that. They actually tell them to do that. There's so many things like going through my head that I want to talk about.
Well, I mean, just as a funny little quirk there, by the way, you mentioned comprehensive sex education, and this is just something, I don't know if there's any real meaning to this, but I know how these people operate. So it sticks out to me every time. Comprehensive sex education, CSE, right? Okay, so what? Well, child sexual exploitation is what they call sex trafficking, CSE. And it's like, I bet you that's not a coincidence. Just like critically responsive teaching or culturally responsive teaching. Culturally responsive teaching and critical race theory are both CRT. I bet you that's not a coincidence. And
none of this stuff is a coincidence. This is a world plan since this. And I think it was Antonio Gramsci who was like, no, we got to do a cultural revolution. I think it was. Right. Is that right?
Yeah. Gramsci laid the groundwork for the Cultural Revolution, and his colleague in Hungary, George Lukács, was the one who had the idea that if you really bring in this really crude, lewd sexual education, then you're really going to take kids and break them away from the previous generation so that you can have your Marxist revolution. Because the kids are they're going to go back and tell their parents crazy sexual stuff. Their parents are going to be like, that's immoral. And the kids are going to reply, you don't understand. You don't know me. This is what we're learning in school. This is good. This is important. Right. And, George Lukács was the deputy commissar of education in the Hungarian communist state that lasted for a few months before, luckily, as it turns out, if you start to bring perversion to the children, my favorite mama bears wake up and they get real mad. And the Hungarian mamas and daddies pushed back against this and broke their revolution.
Yeah.
So it only lasted for a few months that they actually had communist control of Hungary in 1919.
Wow.
But and they're doing this again.
Yeah.
They're definitely doing this again. It's
Oh,
the
yeah.
same stuff, and it's
Same
real
stuff.
bad. And what you're talking about there, where they move the Overton window by being so extreme, just so grotesque and so explicit that, you know, imagine the stuff that, you know, it's like everybody laughs. You always have those stories where some little kid learns their first like properly naughty thing and they don't know what it means and they repeat
Right.
it in some awkward context.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, you know, but you're also, it's like, it's funny, especially later.
Right.
But this is like, it's inducing that in this really perverse, intentional, evil way. And you're
Yeah.
also right that these people are extremely linguistically savvy. They're not particularly good at math, but they're very linguistically savvy and they're very into symbolism. So when you see, you know, or an acronym like CSE that's getting repeated here, you know, my little fox ears pop straight up. I'm like, hello, something's up here.
I never thought about the symbolism part. I'm not really familiar with.
They're obsessed with it. Everything's symbolic. What day, for example, and this is maybe it's hard because with symbolism, are you reading too much into anything? But they have entire theories of what they call semiotics, which is theories of how symbolism works. Like for decades, they've been writing crap about this. So, you know, on what day did all of the big medical lockdowns strike down for the beginning of COVID? It was on the Ides of March, which is when, you know, Julius Caesar was stabbed. And so Trump getting backstabbed by all of his advisors on the Ides of March, like this is the kind of symbolic thing they would love to do. But did they do it on purpose? Who knows?
Right.
They love this kind of stuff. They're all so symbolic. Ultimately, you know, when I said to Marx with all of this creating the world outside and the work and yada yada, this is all based in the kind of like Gnostic traditions, and that's all super symbolic. You know, they're obsessed with symbolism and the effects of symbolism. You see the transition from old Marxism, which is the politics of redistribution, to new Marxism or critical race theory, which is based in the politics of recognition. And so, you know, the semiotic content there is extraordinary. And so, you know, there's so much there that's plausibly deniable, but and so you sound crazy saying it, but then it's like, at some point you stop being a coincidence theorist, you know?
Right. Yeah. At some point you have to just come to the realization that they are serious. This is not a drill. You know, this is not a test. They mean what they say. They are very intentional. You know, if the church, my goodness, could get as intentional and as dedicated to, you know, teaching the work of Christ, that, you know, these critical theorists, you know, maybe we would not have even gotten to this point. Oh, I know there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. So I've been just kind of looking at, you know, like the 60s, 70s period of time, and, you know, where the country was focused on civil rights. So, but yes, so civil rights was at the top. Everybody was focused on civil rights. But at the bottom was the sexual revolution, God being taken out of schools, and the feminist revolution. And I feel like we're doing that again. We are so focused on the race stuff that all of this, the queer theory stuff, all of the, you know, the feminist stuff, and, you know, the God, you know, the church, the God portion, nobody's talking about that. But it's, again, it's like we're doing it again. We're so focused on what people look like, these fickle, superficial, unimportant things, when not to, oh my God, civil rights was a good thing. You know, somebody was like, oh my God, Quisha doesn't like Civil Rights Act. Yes, okay, it's a good thing. It's not the point. The point is the hyper focus on that. We totally missed more important things, because in my opinion, queer theory, I think it's more important. I think it's more damaging and dangerous than critical race theory. I think you know, you start to read the queer theory stuff and you hear the same types of things. We got to tear down the heteronorm, you know, yada yada yada. They're intertwined. They go together. It's the same stuff. But I feel like it's much more dangerous.
It is.
And
you're right. The race stuff makes a hell of a distraction, doesn't it? You know, we're going to squabble about this, and, you know, whether or not this race or that race is getting its equal desserts or whatever, and why, and what you know, we're going to fight about all this. And then meanwhile, you've got like I said earlier, you've got this now dynamic where all the overwhelmingly white kids are like, well, I'm this queer identity, that queer identity, et cetera, because they have no other options for a cool identity. And then, or as Mal would have it, a red identity. And then simultaneously, this stuff's just so insidious. And it's so like they understood Freud, these neo-Marxists, they understand that the sexual drives are really, really strong. They understand that the children actually identify kind of in these kind of 4 categories, very naturally, very early, very, very, very rigid. Anybody who's raised kids knows how rigid they are: man, woman, boy, girl. So there's like adult versus child, and boy versus male versus female, creates these 4 categories. And boy, oh boy, are they rigid about that. I'm a boy, girls are girls. They're so weirdly rigid about it.
Yes.
And that's this developmental phase because they're learning about their identity, and then they're busting in and making this as fluid as possible, as early as possible. Queer literally in their own literature means an identity without an essence. So these are going to be completely unmoored kids who have identity crises. Anxiety and depression are going to follow from this. And then it's also just unsettling and disruptive and very, very, very dangerous, but it's also very seductive. Look at what they do within the queer theory. How many genders are there? How many sexualities are there? Who knows? Hundreds. And it's just kind of like Dungeons and Dragons game for kids to go through and like identify every possible nuance of how they possibly feel about everything gender, sex, romance, because there are romantic identities in addition that aren't sexual identity. I don't know if you knew that. They've separated into romantic identities as well. So you could be heterosexual, but homo-romantic, like things like that. So you make a romantic bond with the same sex, but you make a sexual bond with opposite. And like, they made it so complicated. And then every one of them has a flag, and it's like all this identify, and you're in this club and you're in this team, these are the people who have this flag and they get to fly that flag. And there's this weird amount of obsession it seems weird, but that part's actually, like, a lot of people are like, well, the queer theory literature, that didn't happen in the literature. That happened by teenagers on discussion forums like Tumblr and other social media platforms, where a small number of these theorists, especially probably at the college student age, but also probably some gross adults, were in there grooming kids to turn this organic, because these kids are discovering their identity, teenagers, 13 to 15, 13 to 19 or whatever, discovering their identity, trying to figure out who they are. And they feed them this basically grooming level narcissistic fluidity nonsense. Oh, that little quirk, that boy said something to you and it made you feel this way, and you don't know if you're attracted to him or not now or whatever. Well, that's because blah, blah, blah. And you saw this girl and she's, developing, her body, and you can't stop looking at her boobs or whatever. And that means this and that. And it's all this kind of narcissistic feedback loop. So when you talk about something being totally destructive because of the strength of those drives and the narcissism involved and the increase of that, if you make somebody's identity unstable and fluid from an early age, and they aren't learning who they are from an early age, it's all they have now to figure out who they are is, oh, I'm this flag and that flag, and sometimes I feel like this flag, and then but it's so developed and it's couched in all these words like lithsexual, it make you sound smart, and these complicated like 5-syllable words. And so they get to go to their friends and they're like, well, I'm a blah, blah, blah sexual. And they're like, well, what's that? And all of a sudden you're interesting, and you get to explain something, and something they don't know. It plays upon those, maybe depending on the kid, 8 years old to 18 years old, or 8 years old to 22 years old, impulses so destructively, so disgustingly. It's so dangerous. And then, like you said, if we're over here fighting about race all the time, because it's once that one gets started, it's almost impossible not to argue about it and fight about it. It's so hard. Well, it's because it's so quick. I could say something right now, and you could be like, well, you don't really know what it's like to have grown up black. And I'm like, shit, I don't, or whatever. And all of a sudden we're stuck in that trap.
Yeah.
And now we're not paying attention to the fact that they're not turning our kids necessarily into little perverts. They're perverts turning our kids into people who don't know who they are. That are groomable and unstable and depressed and every other thing.
And I think when you do that, and you have these just massively unstable children who can't even say something so concrete of I'm a boy or I'm a girl, when you have totally pulled that down, how easy for some pedophile to come in and say, well, and this is, these are in these papers too. I forget, Carrie Robinson. I think I read her. I think you might have talked about her. I'm not sure. I know you talked about Hannah Dyer, but I believe it was this Carrie lady. She was talking about how we should be removing the boundary between adult and child. And I'm like, these people are crazy. Like that.
Yeah.
Imagine a kid. They've been inundated with all of this. They have no clue. There's nothing foundational about them anymore. There's nothing objective. There's nothing. Everything is subjective. Like, I don't even know what a boy. Do we even know what a boy is? What makes, because a white person may the what do they call it, the majority, like what is it, like when
the
they're
dominant culture,
the dominant, the
dominant
dominant society came up with that. So how do you really know? How can you trust that? And so they're just wandering throughout the world, and some crazy pedophile comes up to them and was like, well, speaking of, you don't know if you're a boy, and who's to say that I'm a 45-year-old man?
right?
I'm an 8-year-old boy too.
Yeah, I eat cereal. Love is love.
Right. Oh my God.
I'll sit down and eat Fruit Loops and watch cartoons with you. Come sit on my lap. Super gross stuff.
Like, this is okay. When you said I watched your first two episodes, like the part 1 and part 2, and I had to go back and listen again because it was just. And every time, like on the second one, when you were like, I could feel your anger when you were like, this is what your kids are learning in your public school that you're paying. I felt you, James. If nobody else told you, I'm telling you, I felt
oh my gosh. It was so, because so aggravating. It's just awful. And like, she's literally in that paper discussing that the childhood development theories are all wrong and need to be replaced with queer theory.
Yeah.
And she's saying the point of queer theory can't even, so they hold up. It's so, the lying is what really gets you. Well, besides the disgusting perversion, but the lying, they tell you, oh, well, this is about helping LGBTQ kids and the plus or whatever, the I's and the A's and whoever else is, and the two spirits and all these other, it's helping these poor kids. And, they get marginalized. They've been beat up. They've been bullied. They don't know that they don't have role models. You always see these teachers. I wear high heels to school as some guy because I'm queer, and nobody's ever had a queer role model. And it's like a groomer, but, the lies, they say it's about that. And then in this paper, she says, well, it cannot be about creating a stable LGBTQ identity.
Right.
Because that would become stable. Right. It's about making sure that there is no stable identity. And then it's like, but that's your kids. They're trying to make sure they can't form a stable sense of who they are.
Right.
It's like, that's so disgusting. And like you said, this is groomer territory. Like, this is where, oh, you don't know who you are. Let me mentor you. Into who you are. And not that it's just a thing that pops to mind. Maybe he's not the best example to bring up, but Milo Yiannopoulos got blown up. He had his career. He was a mess anyway, but his career was on this rocket ride trajectory. He was pranking everybody. He was trolling the world. He's disgusting in his own right, but he's doing this whole thing. And it seems like he can't break a rule that gets him in trouble. And then he talks about how he had some relationship when he was like 16 or 17 with like a 35-year-old guy who taught him, these are the ropes of being gay. And he's like, and I don't think that was a bad thing or whatever. Boom, canceled from CPAC, book canceled, everything canceled. He was done because he was talking about that inviolable line. And that's the line that these queer theorists are like, that line shouldn't exist. Let's just completely, and we're not talking like a 17-year-old or whatever discovering. We're talking about 8-year-olds, 4-year-olds. We're talking about little kids. And that's where you're going to have that groomer who's broken down their identity step in and be able to say, well, let me teach you. Well, don't you think you would be a lot prettier as a girl than as a boy? And, I'll help you. And, this is the kind of things that little girls do to men. Here, come with me. You can just imagine how disgusting this grooming pathway is. Meanwhile, the stuff they're actually walking him into is, as the book title goes, irreversible damage, right? You can't undo this. You go through at 16 years old a double mastectomy, they're not growing back.
Right.
You get on testosterone for 4 or 5 years and atrophy your genitals they're not coming back to normal.
Right.
Your voice changed. It's not coming back.
Right.
Your bone structure may have changed. It's not coming back.
Yeah.
You know, you with the other direction, you feminize yourself. Like there is a window in male puberty when your testosterone level is preposterous.
Yeah.
Like every bodybuilder on earth is like, if I could be 16 again, you know, because it's like they're injecting crazy amounts of steroids to get their testosterone levels up to like 1200, and like a 16-year-old boy might naturally be banging out 1800, 2000, like just insane, you know, androgens, and that changes your physical body. Like you build more muscle, and even as a woman during your teen years, you lay down more bone density than you will ever again in your life. Bone density obviously being a problem with aging women, you know, if they don't have enough. It's almost all during adolescence. Now imagine that you're a boy completely going, you know, suppressing your testosterone during that crucial window. Or imagine you're of either sex and you're taking puberty blockers, which have massive side effects. I mean, it's just horrific what they're, it's not even just like the sexual stuff they're grooming them into, but it's actually, you know, the irreparable damage, medical catastrophes that, again, with that same, if you end up going down that road far enough, you become medically dependent for the rest of your life.
That's right. And then that makes me think of more about government and these huge healthcare companies and why they have no real interest in helping stop this nonsense. Well, you know that they know that this is wrong. You know, I mean, like there is no, I don't know if you became a medical doctor before the year 2000 for sure, you probably got a solid education in, you know, the medical sciences.
Right.
You know that a boy is, you know, your DNA, it doesn't change. You can't, you know, we can put on all this more superficial stuff or take it off. It still doesn't, you know, it still doesn't change. And having them take these hormones, I think in the future, we're probably going to see a lot more cancer, unfortunately, because I do think that I know me personally, like birth control, that hormones they don't do my body any good. My hair came out and like all kinds of stuff, you know, and that's not an isolated incident. I know tons of women that have problems with hormones. So, you know, it's
so scary.
Yeah.
But
It's so scary.
I agree with you. I agree with you that there is an element where critical race theory, fighting about race, becomes a distraction from this much more insidious and dangerous, and from their perspective, effective form of activism. And like I grunted throughout that podcast, and these are your children, our kids that they're using as their tools for the revolution, regardless of what damage it does to them psychologically or physically, emotionally, permanently. Like it's really bad.
They don't care. And just to wrap this up, because we've gone over an hour, I was trying to keep this, like, I knew we would probably go because I knew this was just going to be a great conversation. The problem that I find when I'm sharing this with parents, as much as I've talked about this, as much you've talked about it, you know, you have Moms for Liberty, there's so many people talking about this. You go and you speak, and the problem that I find when I'm telling parents, grandparents, they understand that this stuff is wrong. They don't like it. But getting them to cross that threshold and say, okay, I need to myself be activate. I need to become an activist. Like I need to activate on the other side against this stuff. It's most of the time, you know, they think that's over there. That's so horrible, but that's really over there. That's not my children. That's not my grandchildren. No, it's your kid. This is not a little pocket in Virginia. I know that's, you know, that was a big hub, but this is all over, not just America. This is all over the West.
That's right.
So what's that?
That's right. It is. It's not in China.
Yeah.
It's everywhere else.
It's not. I think they had a commercial like, we are teaching our boys to be men.
That's right.
And you better not say anything about it. What would you say to a grandparent, a parent, a concerned citizen that might feel like that's everybody else. Like, that's not my kid. That's not in my child's school. What would you say?
I mean, it's like we started at the beginning. It's like you actually have to see it. So you go look, and bless you if it's not. But I would be willing to put money down that it is. It is your kid, and that if you aren't going to stand up for your kid, everybody keeps hoping somebody else is going to come up and save the day. And I hate that saying that there is no cavalry, they're not coming or whatever. And I'm like, it's not what I see it as anymore. I keep going to these, I go to speak everywhere. I travel like once a week somewhere in the country.
Yeah.
I talk to, and by the way, I've been to like 20 something states this year, and it's in all of them. It's everywhere, and it's your everywhere. Kids, big districts, small districts, doesn't matter. But
red states, blue states, it's everywhere.
Yep, red state, blue, red states. It's worse in red states than you would ever think, and they use the cover. Oh, this is a conservative state. Oh, this is a Southern Baptist convention. It couldn't be here.
Right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
We're conservatives. No, it's there too. A lot of this stuff, by the way, came out of Norman, Oklahoma, which is one of the reddest states that there is at the University of Oklahoma. A lot of this stuff started there.
That's actually pretty smart. So if you could change it in like a red state, or like a place that's super conservative, then let that infiltrate. Then it'll be much easier to change it in a place like California. But I'm
that's
sorry.
Right. That's right. And so it's everywhere. But what I keep seeing is it's like, well, I was real disappointed. I was like, man, it's the same people like at all these things. And I know it's possible I'm just getting invited to similar stuff, but I was like the same kind of names. And it's like these people that I've, respect, and I appreciate their work. And it's just, but they're not the hero, right? They're not the knight in shining armor coming and it's going to sweep through and save the world. And I'm like, man, it's always the same people. And then suddenly, it's just a couple of months ago, it finally dawned on me. I was like, oh, we're the people. We are the people. But what it takes is getting up off your couch and getting on your horse.
That's right.
We are the people. And there, from what I've been told from some pretty competent political scientists, scholars of history, is that when there are these kinds of attempted revolutions, there are basically 2 or 3 ways at the end. One is in tremendous violence, and we don't want that.
Right.
And one is with Vladimir Putin, who sees they started this crap in Russia, and he sees dictatorial powers and started killing journalists and everything. We don't want that. So an autocrat taking command. And the third is when parents activate and they realize that their kids, this is why I keep saying mama bears are going to save this country. When parents realize that their kids really are getting used and damaged to get used in this way, and they activate, that unleashes a force that only, maybe the most brutal totalitarians can resist. They pushed back a literal communist parents pushed back a literal communist revolution in Hungary in 1919. Parents are the key if we want to get out of this without violence and without a dictator. That's of course what they said Trump was a big dictator that was going to do that, and he didn't do it, because if he did, we wouldn't have these problems. We'd have other problems. And we don't want those problems either. So it's like, it's us, man. It's like we're like, I feel like I keep telling my wife, I'm like, I'm so considered important for all of this. That's like half the time I still feel like that little 10-year-old boy, and it's like, and now I have to be like Churchill or something. It's like, it's so uncomfortable, but it's us. And it's and it's you, if you're the mom or dad watching, or the grandma or grandpa watching, it's you, and it is your kids, and you are the key. But if you don't think it's there, go look. I bet you're going to be shocked and appalled at what you find. Start trying to ask. I have a friend who just emailed me texted me yesterday, and she said, my kid, you aren't going to believe this. And I was like, what's up? And she said, well, my kid is sick, home from school for, the week or whatever. So I contacted the school to get the assignments so that we could make them up or do them at home, just normal parent, kid, sick, everyday stuff. Right. They won't give the assignments. They won't. And she said, well, she called the teacher and was like, well, why? And they said, no, there's too many parents out there that are just trying to find out what's going on in these schools. So we're not sharing what's going on in the schools anymore. They can catch up when they come back. And it's like, that's just this normal mom of 3 kids, just average, everyday, normal mom of 3 kids. And it's not even like she's doing a FOIA request on the school. It's my
Right.
kid was sick. We want to make up the assignments. No, you can't see the assignments. She
That
can
is
make them up when she comes
crazy.
back to school. And it's like, whoa, something weird's going on. Then you start looking at
Right.
these stories of these different school districts, whether it's the cover-ups in Loudoun County.
Yep.
That's, of course, extreme, but it's probably happening a lot of places.
Oh, I'm
We're probably
sure.
going to see an avalanche of these stories coming out. But or you look at the story from Rhode Island with Nicole Solis. She's like, I
Yeah.
want to see my kid's curriculum. And
Yeah.
then it turns into a legal battle and
Right.
hundreds of thousands of dollars. There was one
Yeah.
school district that they requested the curriculum or whatever it was. And they said, well, we can give it to you, but it'd be $900,000 for us to
Right.
deliver it to you.
Yeah.
Like something very unpleasant is going on if they're doing
Mhm.
these levels of hiding stuff. So
Yeah.
just go ask. Can I
Right.
see what you're actually teaching? Let me,
Mhm.
ask your kids. Let me see your homework.
Right.
See, especially they get to 6th, 7th grade and they start seeing the surveys they're having the kids fill out. How much
Mhm.
money do your parents make? Have you ever how do you deal with the fact that your body's changing?
Right.
This stuff that's coming in through social emotional learning and so
Oh,
on.
yes.
And you'll see it is your kids, and your kids are the target because your kid is the tool for their revolution that
Yep.
whether, if you want to talk about critical race theory, I'm just going to break it to you, ain't going to be good for black people if the communists take over.
Hello.
Ain't going to be good for
Hello.
anybody.
It ain't gonna be good for. They want to make everybody a slave.
They do. That's
Yeah.
correct. And eating
Yes.
your bugs and every other thing that nobody wants to
Right.
do.
I saw that. I'm not surprised. That guy is crazy with a capital K.
He certainly is. And so, yeah, it is happening to your kids, and you actually are the key. So you got Moms for Liberty, you got Parents Defending Ed, you got No Left Turn Education, you got all these kind of moms and dads groups.
Yeah.
You got Dads Taking Charge or whatever it was called. I forgot what that's called. Dads
Yeah.
Showing Up or something.
Yeah.
And you get like 20-something dads show up to volunteer at the school, and all of a sudden all
Right.
these behavioral problems where the kids are out of control, they start cleaning up.
It's a
20-something dads
miracle.
volunteering. It's a miracle. Imagine that. Positive, strong males in the situation, and all of a sudden kids are towing the line.
That's
Nobody's getting a whooping or nothing like that. It's just like nobody's beating anybody's kids. It's just
Yeah.
dads are there. Everybody's like, whoa, dads are here.
Yep,
You got
exactly.
parents organizations in states like Utah, Utah
Yeah.
Parents United, that has
Yep.
tens of thousands of parents and grandparents now,
Mhm.
and it's making a difference.
Yeah.
It's making a big difference. And parents speaking up,
Absolutely.
lawmakers I can tell you right now, after what happened in Virginia in the last election where Youngkin won, parents, all the politicians are going to be trying to listen to or pretend to listen to parents.
Right.
So you also got to get your discernment goggles out and figure out who's a real leader, like your lovely governor,
Yes.
and who's a snake, like
Mhm.
most of them.
Right. True. Absolutely true. I made a video after Youngkin won, and I was like, okay, this is good, but don't let your guard down. Do
Don't
not
put your
just
guard down.
because we have a great governor too, but we have we have a lot of education problems in Florida. We had a segregated right where I live, which is supposed to be like South Georgia conservative place, which is not anymore, but we had a segregated school assembly planned. I'm sorry, what? A segregated, they were going to have the black children meet and not, I mean, it's funny because it's so stupid. They were going to have the black children meet at like 9:30 and the white kids to meet at 10. I'm like, okay, well, what do the little biracial kids do? Like, where do they go?
Yeah,
where
they
do
go
the Asian
they
kids
go confused and
Right.
whatever else.
Yeah.
And it's just such a it's
I
so
know.
terrible because they're
It is.
reproducing the problem so they can milk the problem so they can push their agenda.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Thomas Sowell. He said it so well that there's certain activists that they keep racism on life support
Mhm.
so that they can do their activism. And it's just
Right.
like that's the sick stuff that's happening. But
Yeah.
your kids are the pawns in that play, and I don't know something sicker than using people's kids as the
Right.
pawns in your political agenda like that.
So I know this is not your latest book, but this is
It's the big one, though.
Or Cynical Theories.
Yeah.
You and Helen Pluckrose wrote this, and I think when you were talking about it, you were saying that she's the main. I know you guys wrote it together, but it's like she's
she's the main driver behind the book and its contents.
Yeah.
Very profound analysis of the connection to postmodern theory that
Mhm.
we see. So everything's being subjective,
Yeah.
boundaries are all going to be blurred out,
Mm.
everything becomes linguistic and symbolic.
Yeah.
These kinds of things. We're going to think in terms of identity groups instead of in terms of individuals or universal humanity, everybody being one blood, like you said from the Bible.
Yeah.
Those kinds of changes are all documented there. And whether that's
Mm.
in the queer theory, whether it's in the critical race theory, we also
Yeah.
do post-colonial feminism, gender, fat studies,
Mm.
disability studies. It's in everything
Yeah.
where they can find a wedge to pry something up. That's where it's
Yeah.
at.
Yeah. So where can people find you? And like, what's your latest? I think you have another book that's out now, right?
I have another book coming out soon. I've more or less
Okay.
finished it. We're in the kind of get it typeset and put it out phase. It's going to be called Race Marxism. And it's about
Mm.
critical race theory and
Mhm.
explaining how it really just is Marxism,
Yeah.
using dressed up in a race box
Yep.
instead of in the class box. And so that should be coming out, I hope, within a month or two. We're
Okay.
at the I've finished writing it finally. I actually talked to my business partners the other day and I was like, get this thing out of my hands before I decide to change it again.
Right.
And so it's done. But that should be coming soon through my company, which is New Discourses. So
Yes.
you'll be able to find it on the website is newdiscourses.com. That's where my
Mhm.
podcast is. You mentioned my 2 groomer schools podcasts. I got a third one coming out that
Ooh.
I think is really going to connect with people. It should be in about a week or so. So
Okay.
that's a place to look. And on social media, the company is at New Discourses, and I personally am at Conceptual James. I'm very irreverent and kind of wild on social media. So, caveat emptor a little bit there, but I think I'm fun.
I do too. You are one of my favorite voices to hear from. I really love your work. I really respect it, and I also love that you're a very laid back person. Just really easy to talk to. Really enjoyed meeting you a couple months ago, and hopefully we'll see each other again. And thank you so much for everything that you've done in this space and what you're continuing to do. It is so needed, and
Thank you.
I think what you're doing is super important. So thank you so much, and thank you for being my very first guest. So we're gonna celebrate a little bit because I'm extra because I am. I hope I do this right. So, in celebration of my first podcast episode with James Lindsay, let's see. Woo!
All right.
Yay!
That,
Fun!
that's awesome. The glitter
Thank you,
bottle
James.
explosion. Thank you.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Look forward to it.
Bye bye.
Bye.